Today we're going to talk about theories of regulation. Broadly speaking, there are two ways of thinking about regulatory policy making. The first perspective is normative. Here the starting point is that regulation should produce policy outcomes that are in the public interest. To clarify the notion of public interest, consider a situation with two systems, A and B, as illustrated in this figure. The current policy is X, more is better, so system A benefits from the policy increases as we move up the figure. System B benefits from the policy increase as we move from left to right. Consider two possible policy changes. Assume that policy is moved from X to Y. This is an upward and leftward move. It benefits system A at the expense of system B. It is redistributive policy change, making one system better off at the expense of the other. In contrast, assume that the policy is moved from X to Z. This is both an upward and rightward move. Both systems are made better off from this policy change. Policy changes that make everyone better off are called Pareto efficient. A strong position on the role of regulatory policy making is that only Pareto efficient policy changes are legitimate. Now consider a notion that the state should only concern itself with the Pareto efficient regulatory policy changes. It's a rather conservative position. There is little scope for policy making unless there is a technological innovation that allows for moves in the direction of Z, or market failures that, if corrected, makes both system A and B better off. There's more scope for policy making if we allow some of the gains from system A gets from policy change to be used to compensate system B. The challenge is then to find the right level of compensation. A yet looser principle is to allow policy changes where it would be possible to compensate system B for his losses from some of the benefits gained by system A, even if such compensation do not take place. Note that this requirement also rules out a purely redistributive policy change. All these notions of Pareto efficiency are inherently conservative, as they do not consider the legitimacy of the existing policy. Few changes to a policy where system A gains a lot and system B gains very little are permitted. Some would find this notion of Pareto efficiency overly restrictive. Moreover, the normative theory of regulation argues that although markets may be efficient in a textbook version, the reality is that there are several market failures that should be corrected. A market failure is when a producer of a good does not pay the whole cost associated with the production. A classic example is air pollution produced by factories burning fossil fuel as a part of the production process. The government can shift these costs back to the producer by setting a carbon emission tax. Another example is asymmetry of information. Producers know a lot more about the content of their product and their production methods than consumers. The government can make it compulsory to produce information about the content and their production methods through labeling regulations. Monopolistic competition is also bad for consumers. Regulators can intervene to regulate the level of competition in a segment of the economy. Throughout, the guiding principle of the normative theory of regulatory policymaking is the public interest. So for the normative theory of regulation, majoritarian institutions such as Parliament are inherently problematic to involve in the policy making. The first thing to note is that legislators, they are elected. The electoral logic is redistributive. The ruling coalition will want to adopt policy that redistributes benefits away from the supporters of the minority parties towards the support of the majority coalition. They do this because they want to get re-elected. Somewhat simplistic, when the left is in power, redistribution will be from business interests to labor, consumers and the environment. When the right is in power, redistribution will be in the opposite direction. To avoid this, the normative theory concludes that the responsibility for regulatory policymaking should be delegated to an agency or a non-majoritarian institution. Positive theories take as a starting point as the world is, not how it should be. The focus is on the demand and supply of regulation. Building on Olson's logic of interest group organization, the first thing to note is that concentrated interests have more to gain from organizing to influence the regulators than diffused interest. So producers are more likely to be better organized than consumers. Furthermore, the nature of political competition means that politicians mainly care about re-election. While these politicians understand that the regulation benefits producers at the expense of consumers, they also understand that the former groups have more available resources to spend on financing electoral campaigns. Moreover, most voters stay rational ignorant about the details of most regulatory policies. As a result, politicians have the incentive to supply regulatory policies that are in line with the preferences of those that care most about the regulation. These are the business interests. The logical consequence of this argument is that regulatory policies are acquired by the industry and designed and operated primarily for its interest. The normative and positive theories of regulation have opposite prescription for how regulation should be made. From a normative perspective, if policies should only correct market failures, they should be made by a non-majoritarian independent agency. In contrast, positive theories maintain that it's unlikely that independent regulators will produce Pareto-efficient policies. They are even more likely to be captured by the producers than majoritarian institutions. So this paints a somewhat negative picture of regulatory policy making. In practice, it is unlikely that a small producer group will be able to fully dominate the regulatory field. As the losses become substantial, there will be a point where it's rational for consumers and other diffuse groups to organize. Moreover, regulatory policy making takes place in a highly institutional setting with multiple checks and balances and where different interests have different point of entry. For example, in the EU, regulation can both be produced at the national level as well as the EU level. Given the choice, producers would like regulation to be set at the highest possible level, as it makes it harder for diffused interest to mobilize. Finally, institutional rules can limit the discretion of regulatory agencies. Legislators have several institutional mechanisms to ensure that the agency do not supply regulation that only benefits the producers. It can control the appointment of the head of the agency and require it to consult with a wide range of interest and report extensively to parliamentary committees. However, such tight parliamentary control of regulatory agency takes us back to where we started, with a parliamentary majority using regulatory policies to redistribute benefits to their constituencies rather than to the society as a whole.